Hi, Misha here. And for those who remember, we did a video looking at Springfield Armory and all the stuff around them. I brought this rifle out back then. My good old Springfield SAR-3. Well, SAR-3 8 overstamp. We'll get into that. A Hellenic Arms G3 or HK91 762x39. Excuse me, 762 NATO. It's been a long day already. 308. Been meaning to take this back out. Kind of waiting for a reason, excuse. Have plenty of ammo kicking about. And then my cousin asked to shoot a few 308s, and so decided to take it down for a few rounds. And, you know, I thought we would talk about the history of this gun because it's really interesting and not at all straightforward. Also, thought I might kind of mention why I ended up picking and keeping one of these as opposed to an actual German Heckler & Koch HK91, because several have been in the store. So with that, yeah, we'll just dive into this, shoot it a bit, talk about it a bit. But, of course, as always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. You know the deal. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. Now with that over and done with, let's get into it. Alright, the SAR-3. The SAR-3 and SAR-38 and SAR-8 were all manufactured in Athens, Greece by EBO, today EAS. That stands for Hellenic Arms Industries, back then with the modern name of Hellenic Defense Systems. And not to get too in the weeds with the history of the G3, as you know, it was adopted by West Germany in 1959 based on the SETME Model B, aka the Spanish Model 1958. And the original G3 was wood, and it had more traditional Mauser-esque rear sights. They would upgrade these with the G3A2, retaining the wood, but going to the newer pattern of cocking tube and handle, as well as the diopter sights we know and love today. And then the G3A3 would introduce the polymer furniture, and both the skinny originally and then later wide handguard. It would also introduce the alloy magazines, the lightweight, which are surprisingly durable and very affordable, and what you saw us shooting with. But because the SAR-3s shipped with a steel mag, I plugged one in. But that was kind of the G3A3. It was a lighter weight, more modernized version. Originally, the G3A3s retained the phosphate finish, but soon they would go to a paint over phosphate. Now, originally, even though the G3 is identified with HK, it was actually manufactured by HK and Rheinmetall in the 1960s. Rheinmetall would give up its production for other favors by 1969, and by 1977, HK, Heckler & Koch, would pretty much have full rights to the design, as well as the HK33 and MP5 and all that. And they started selling these abroad, and that's where EBO, the Hellenic Arms Company, came in. The Greek military, the Hellenic military, had been looking for a new service rifle to replace older guns, including M1 Grands and whatnot. And in the 1970s, they selected the G3. It was easy to maintain, easy to train troops on, built from stamped steel for the most part, and with the new A3 furniture, the modern polymer, it worked well for them. So by the late 70s, this was their official service rifle. And actually would remain so into the 21st century, and they would have full production rights and assistance from HK. So when Springfield worked with them in the mid-80s to produce the SAR-3, well, it was as good as it gets, and it was very close to the HK91. The SAR-3 like the HK91 and the G3, had an overall length of about 40.5 inches with the fixed stock and weighed just over 9 pounds. That might sound heavy, but for a .308 for a battle rifle, it's not bad, frankly. Any lighter, and it gets even less controllable in rapid fire. It had a 17.7-inch barrel with a removable flash hider, and of course modular furniture that HK is famous for. Now, the SAR-3, just like the original HK91, was pretty different from its military cousin. Quite obviously, it did not have the paddle mag release, but it also did not use the push pin, the hinge trigger pack. Instead, it used the shelf, something that was maintained all the way up until about 2014 when the POFs came in, and now the MKEs as well, when the ATF said that you can have a push pin there as long as it can't be readily converted to full auto. And when asked them why they didn't permit it in the 80s, they replied that no one asked them. I think HK came up with this method and just stuck with it. Now, to be fair, HK did import a semi-auto G3 briefly back in the early 60s, and then they had the HK41 between about 64 and 76, although it changed a bit, and then we would get to the HK91, and that's what these were patterned after. So it had the shelf lower, standard grip and stock, and pretty much standard barrel. Interestingly, no bayonet lug originally with those. And they took standard magazines. Fun fact too, even though today even the steel mags are pretty easy to get, back in the 80s and 90s, HK G3 mags were not cheap. Although the guns were cheaper, at least compared to, say, the FAL or even the BM59, and that's the original HK. Then Springfield came in with the SAR-3, and it was a very quality gun for a very economical price, something that kind of maintained itself into the 21st century.
I'm good. Yeah, SAR-3.
When you count from the beginning to the end, fewer than 8,000 of these Springfield HK G3 type guns seem to have been imported. And we really don't know the exact dates. Some sources say 1985. Some say the first ones didn't show up on the market till 1988. I have to wonder if the deal was begun in 1985, but it took time for the factory, EBO, to deliver, and so they weren't really available till 87, 88. I don't know, frankly. There's also a disagreement on when the last true imports came in. Some say 94, some say 98. But it's not all, murky. For example, we know a lot more about the serial range. And there are a lot of interesting variants. As is pretty famously known, the first 500, give or take, around serial number 05001 up to about 05499, give or take. Some say it's a little bit lower, say 48 something. Either way, the first roughly 500 were marked G3. But even within that, there's actually two sub-variants. The first 200 or so, up to about serial number 5200, were not marked on the receiver made in Greece, although they were still marked with the EBO and Athens marking under the barrel. But after 5200, the next roughly 300 G3 marked guns would have it on the side of the receiver. And lore has it that HK got up in arms and sued Springfield, and that's why they changed the name to SAR-3. Regardless of the exact reasoning, we can definitely imagine HK was none too happy about them using that name, and for that matter, probably U.S. Customs not either, since the G3 was a battle rifle. So around 5500, the name switched to SAR-3, but this would be very brief. Already by serial number 057 799, this SAR-3 would end. Because in March, specifically March 14, 1989, George Bush the first signed an executive order, which we called the day the import ban, that applied to quote-unquote assault rifles. This was part of the war on drugs and all of that we've talked about in previous videos. And that's where my rifle comes in here, the SAR-3/8 overstamps. These guns were already in the country as Preban configured SAR-3s, but were still in customs being processed when the executive order was signed. In fact, they weren't released from customs until May of 1989. Because the SAR-3 was banned along with other things, they were overstamped with the 8, and they would receive a thumbhole stock originally. It was actually first manufactured by Bishop and later by Bell and Carson for these. They would also have the muzzle brake pinned on, but they would still ship with a 20-round mag because there was actually not many changes needed. And in fact, they sold an accurizing kit, which included a standard A2 stock, standard pistol grip housing, and the original flash hider. And oddly, if you purchased the SAR-3/8 and installed the accurizing kit before November 30th, 1990, it was essentially grandfathered in and in effect became a pre-ban. Hey, I know it's weird, but there you go. And since you really couldn't prove someone had installed the parts before that time, effectively all SAR-3/8s overstamps are okay to have the stock and grip. And in all sincerity, this one did come with it, and as far as I know, they were installed before the deadline of November because it was well known. Thought I'd get J-Rose help to make sure we do get the markings. Pretty standard on this side, on the left side, the non-port side. And of course, the gun on various parts, like the bolt group and barrel, have various Greek factory stampings as well. So, this is a relatively late production, SAR-3/8, because the final ones would be not long after this, in the 08980 range. But before they got to 9,000 even though we like nice even numbers, they would start to go over to the true SAR-8s, just a few guns before. And the SAR-8 would be the true post-ban gun. It would ship with the later style thumbhole stock. It would have the neutered forearm that could not mount the bipod all the time. And most importantly, our barrel would be quite heavily modified with the 8. And now the right side, the port side, which on a ship would be starboard. Never mind. You know what I mean. Ejection port side. This is the more interesting on this gun because you can see the SAR-3/8 overstamp here, as well as the made in and all that good stuff. Like the HK91, and for that matter, the military G3, the SAR-3 and SAR-3/8 had a 17.7-inch barrel. And it actually has a shoulder that flares up and has some very interesting threads. We have the 15 mil threads here, but behind them we have these tines that allow the muzzle device to spring on and not detach. In fact, you can take these on and off by hand. It's actually a pretty nifty system. Now with the 3/8s, they simply would pin on, sometimes even just kind of Loctite on a brake, and you could just take it off and put this on. It wasn't a big deal. But with the true SAR-8s, they would chop the barrel, removing about right here. And then they would usually pull back the flash hider so it looked like it was on, but the slots were not effective and they were solid. And this gave the SAR-8 a much shorter distance between the flash hider and the triple frame here. And that was kind of the problem with them. They were chopped off, and you could not simply rethread them to the original pattern because of how the barrel jumps up. Now you could thread them something smaller, say 14 mil AK pattern, and some people would actually take a sleeve from a D-mill barrel and make an extension, but it was really quite difficult to get them looking right again. So the Dash 8s have that major difference from the Dash 3 8s and the original Dash 3s. Let me put this down here. So you can screw this down by hand, and then the spring will take hold of these tines, these notches in the back. And stay on, and it does not come off during shooting, but it's easy to remove by hand. So the SAR-8s would be imported from roughly 1990 because the SAR-3 were only the Cotton Customs guns. Although there were several thousand, they were all essentially 1989 imports. The 8 would take over in 1990 and either run, like I said, through 94 or 98. Regardless, the serial numbers would range from just under 9,000 up to just over 12,750. So, not an insignificant number. And they still were the same quality gun as far as the receiver and the barrel. They just had that neutered front end, and they would usually ship with a 10-round mag instead of a 20, but they still had the standard magwell. But of course, by 1998, the rules would change yet again once President Clinton amended the original EO from 1989 to prohibit the ability to accept a so-called high-capacity, i.e. over 10 rounds, magazine, and that put an end to a lot of imports, most all of the Springfields, and other guns, the FALs, and the Daewoo's, and other fun guns. SAR-3 again. One major reason I sought out an SAR-3 or 3.8, because there's really no difference, is because I could modify it and shoot it. When I picked this one up, they were quite affordable, not much more than a PTR, believe it or not. But HK91s were quite high already, and I knew modifying one of those would have not been the best thing, and I wanted a shooter. And it's the same gun as an HK91 for all intents and purposes, except it has a very nice phosphate finish instead of the HK paint. To be fair, military guns, well, they had a phosphate finish up until the late 70s too, so that's fine. And, you know, EBO is a licensed company. They obtained the tooling and did that. But I definitely wanted a 3 or a 3.8 because I did want to mess with the messed up chopped down barrel of the Dash 8. So I picked this so I could modify it and have fun with it to make it into a G3A3 clone or A2 clone, whichever, or maybe even an A4. In the end, as you see, I've pretty much stuck with the A3 pattern here. So let's talk about some of the changes I've made. Standard A2 stock, standard grip with the steel lower. Now this lower is not the original one it came with, because the original one, well, this is a shelf type, as you know, but what they did, they just simply cut it off here to take away the pinhole. A lot of other guns, even back then, like the HKs, they would still have the spot there, just no pin. I thought that was very ugly, so I put on what they used to call a clipped and pinned lower with a faux pin here. Never got around to putting on the paddle mag release, although maybe one day will. Same kind of goes for the grenade ring here. I actually have a triple frame with one, but I just haven't installed it yet. But I did install this jobber here, a bayonet lug for more or less standard HK pattern bayonet, and these just plug right in with one screw. Even the original HK91s and SAR-3s pre-ban did not have the bayonet plunger, but it's very easy to install, and it looks really neat. Here it is, kind of that interesting over-the-barrel style instead of under, and this is an innie instead of an outie when it comes to the lug, unlike the Setme, which is kind of the reverse. Fun fact, during the 94 assault weapons ban, the federal ban, you could actually buy bayonets that would go into the socket up here for your HK G3 type gun, because the bans prohibited bayonet lugs, not necessarily bayonets. So if you could find another way to attach them without a lug, they were still legal. Obviously, this one has the accessorizing kit with the original flash hider, and I set it up with the slim handguard, but I can always put the wide one back on. And when you have seen us shooting, we were using the newer alloy mags, but here it has with the steel in it. Very nice feeling gun. And here the bayonet is flipped over. Notice there's not a screw on this side. This goes in there. And back to this lower I've got on here. The other side of the clipped and pinned. And this does have a three-way, but the third position doesn't do anything. Even though I used this different lower, the actual trigger pack inside is the original Greek. I swapped them out because obviously I would. But yeah, I just like the way this fills it up more. And even though the selector markings aren't 100% correct for a Greek gun, that's okay. And of course the classic green furniture, leather sling, the whole enchilada. Again, I bought this to be a project gun, a clone gun, and a shooter gun. And it has served me very well for many a year. Alright, me back in front now. You know the manual arms with these. Of course you can lock it open manually. If there's no hold open, it is a very smooth gun. Of course, without the paddle release here, which is instinctual, you have to stretch your finger to that. On a military gun, this is just a backup release. The paddle is the standard, but for civilian guns from the 80s, yeah, that's what we had. Now these steel mags fit a little tighter than the alloy, but they still go on quite easily. This actually has a pretty decent trigger for an HK type gun. And of course, because this one has the different lower to it, pretty standard selector here. But this is not Greek. And of course, disassembly, you know the drill. 2 push pins. They actually come out very easily. It's quite easy to swap stocks. And 1 push pin on the handguard. And only a fake push pin down here because, yeah, clipped and pinned lower. Of course, one of the nice things about these guns, for one thing, they're mostly all parts compatible with some minor fitting depending on the gun itself. And they're easy to pop in and out furniture and other things because of the push pins. So here's my A4 retracting stock. You've seen it before. One of those things that's a little cooler looking than it is shooting with, and it does add a little extra weight, kind of bumps the gun up to about 10 pounds versus about 9 pounds with the A2 stock. It does have, of course, the buffer inside. 2-position, old school style. Here's the newer canvas and leather sling. And here's the popular wide forearm, complete with QD bipod, which traditionally a lot of these would come with, even if this front lug was machined down. Even some of the Prebans I've seen had it. But then again, since these pieces of furniture are so easy to change out, it's kind of hard to know what is and isn't original. Funny that, huh? Oh well. Yeah, wide handguard. Kinda neat. And nice to be able to put a bipod on one of these jobbers. One push pin for the front, and two for the rear. You know the deal. SAR-3, by the way.
SAR-3, by the way.
Yep.
Nice.
So, we'll end with me back in front of the camera. This really is a neat gun, and there are actually probably fewer of these, at least SAR-3s and SAR-3/8s in the country than there are HK91s. Maybe not HK41s, but yeah. But this isn't the first time we see this. The Spanish Mars-imported Setme sport far fewer of those in the country than HK, and while they are desirable, they still don't bring as much. As I've said throughout the video, I really picked this one because it's a good one that I can modify without feeling guilty, also shoot without feeling guilty. Of course, in recent years they have gone up some, but still cheaper than an HK. On top of that, people will call these clones, or at best contract, but that's really only in the HK world if you think about it. And I kind of come things from the AK point of view. We don't consider only guns out of Russia to be true Kalashnikovs. Romanian, Polish, Hungarian, we consider them all AKs because they were all made in an actual war factory, if you were, using the original, we'll call it TDP. And the same thing goes here. The Ebo factory was set up by HK, just as the POF factory was. Well, not the factory itself, but the production line. You know what I mean. So, calling it a clone isn't really fair. Now, calling it a contract gun, again, that's kind of something unique to the HK fan base. If we were talking ARs, a lot of people wouldn't say only Colt ARs are real. Lots of other factories are as well. And this is a high-quality gun. I have to wonder if maybe that whole thing got started during the dark days in the late 90s and early 2000s where we did have a lot of knockoffs, clones and copies, the special weapons guns, the Kahars, the Bobcats. Yeah, they weren't the same. But something like this, it feels just like the real German product, and it shoots damn good. So if you're looking for a roller-delayed, roller-locked gun, I mean, you don't want to spend the money on an HK, and for some reason you don't want a PTR, which I fully admit, PTR 91 is usually a really good shooter too. But if you run across an SAR-3 or SAR-3-8, it's really a good buy. Even an SAR-8, if it's one of the Greek imports and you don't mind the chopped down barrel, is a good buy. Maybe it'd be a good base for like a G3K, who knows. But they're very high quality guns, and while they're not unknown, they're just not talked about as much. And so that's why kind of all year I've been meaning to take this out, and it just seemed like a good gun to introduce Fox to the G3 platform with. So what do you think? Do any of you own these or have in the past? If so, what have your experiences been like? Again, mine's been very positive. As I said at the beginning, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. With that, this is Misha, and on behalf of Fox and JRO2, we'll catch you very soon next time.